Peabo Bryson is gone, and Kenny Lattimore's tribute just broke R&B in half. The king of balladeers, one of the greatest soul music icons this genre has ever produced, passed away on June 2, 2026, and the outpouring from the music world has been unlike anything this genre has seen in years, but one voice cut through all the noise louder than the rest, and that voice belonged to Kenny Lattimore. In this video, we're diving all the way in. Peabo's extraordinary life, his record-breaking legacy, the heartbreak behind the scenes, and exactly what Kenny Lattimore said that has fans, music lovers, and old-school R&B heads across the internet completely undone. Let's start right here because some of you younger viewers may not fully grasp what the world just lost, and I need you to understand this before anything else. Peabo Bryson was not just a singer, he was a category of his own. An R&B legend and a soul music institution the likes of which we simply do not produce anymore. The New York Times music critic John Perellis once called him the Pavarotti of soul singers. Think about that for a second. Pavarotti, the man they reserved that comparison for, that operatic, once-in-a-generation level of technical ability, and they put Peabo Bryson in that same sentence. That is not a compliment that gets handed out casually. And if that still doesn't land for you, here is a fact that I promise you have never heard anywhere else, because most videos covering Peabo's death are going to skip right over it. At one singular moment in February 1993, Peabo Bryson had separate records simultaneously sitting at #1 on the pop chart, #1 on the adult contemporary chart, #1 on the contemporary jazz chart, and #1 on the classical crossover album chart. Not one chart, 4 charts all at once with different recordings. That had never been done before by any artist in music history. Not Michael Jackson, not Whitney Houston, not Stevie Wonder, nobody. Peabo Bryson did it first, and that record-setting achievement has been quietly sitting in the history books while the rest of the world only remembered him as the Disney guy. And that right there is our hot take #1 for this video. We have spent 30 years reducing Peabo Bryson to Beauty and the Beast and A Whole New World, and while those songs are absolutely iconic, the reduction of his entire artistry down to 2 Disney duets is honestly a little disrespectful. This man had over 20 studio albums, more than 40 charted singles on the R&B charts, a career stretching from 1965 all the way to 2026, and people act like he just showed up one day to record a cartoon movie and went home. No. Peabo Bryson built one of the most technically disciplined, commercially consistent, and artistically serious careers in the history of American popular music. He deserves better than being a trivia answer. Now let's talk about where this all began, because Peabo's origin story is one of those only in America journeys that you honestly couldn't make up. He was born Robert Peabo Bryson on April 13, 1951, in Greenville, South Carolina. Grew up largely on his grandfather's farm in Malden, and from the beginning, his mother Marie was the one who lit that fire in him. She was a serious music lover, the kind of woman who would drag the whole family out to see the greats whenever they came through town. Peabo has talked about this in interviews. He said by the time he was 5 or 6 years old, he could already sing along with Sam Cooke, Little Richard, and Billie Holiday because his mama had taken him to see them all perform live. Let that sink in. 5 years old, watching Billie Holiday. That kind of exposure doesn't produce regular singers. That produces legends. He won a local talent competition at just 12 years old, and by the time he was 14, he was already a working professional, singing backup for a regional group called Al Freeman and the Upsetters. Now here's something that most people covering Peabo Bryson right now don't know, and I want you to remember this because it's one of my favorite little details about this man's story. His name. His actual given name was Robert Peabo Bryson with an A, Peabo, not Peabo. It's a French West Indian name, and the legend goes that a band leader had trouble pronouncing it correctly, kept fumbling over Peabo, and somewhere in that fumble the name Peabo was born. That is the name a mispronunciation gave to one of the greatest vocalists in the history of R&B. Sometimes the universe just decides. From there, he joined Moses Dillard and the Tex Town Display, a band that toured the famous Chitlin circuit, those segregation-era venues across the South where black performers honed their craft in front of black audiences who demanded nothing but excellence. Peabo was a teenager touring these venues, learning every night, developing the vocal discipline that would eventually make New York Times critics reach for Italian opera comparisons to describe him. By 1976, he released his debut album, simply titled Peabo, on Atlanta's Bang Records. It caught enough attention to land him a deal with Capitol Records a year later, and then it was on. Reaching for the Sky went gold. Crosswinds went gold. He teamed up with Natalie Cole. He made a duet album with Roberta Flack. He signed with Elektra in 1984, and that's where he recorded If Ever You're in My Arms Again, which became his first top 10 pop hit, landing at number 10. He went back to Capitol in 1989, where he scored his first R&B #1 single with a cover of Al Wilson's Show and Tell. Then he came back to the top of the R&B chart again with Can You Stop the Rain in 1991. That song also earned him a Grammy nomination for Best R&B Vocal Performance, and for those who need the full picture of just how dominant Peabo was during this era, he was the Quiet Storm. Literally. The Quiet Storm radio format, that late-night smooth R&B programming block that defined romantic radio across Black America throughout the 80s and 90s, Peabo Bryson was its unofficial king. Radio programmers built playlists around his voice. He was the artist that Quiet Storm was made for, and Quiet Storm was made for him. You cannot tell that story without him. The man was a machine, a quiet, consistent, decade-after-decade machine who never had a bad album era and never lost his voice. And then Disney called. In 1991, Peabo Bryson walked into a studio with a relatively unknown Canadian singer named Celine Dion to record the title track for Disney's animated film Beauty and the Beast. Now understand the moment. Celine Dion was not yet Celine Dion, not the global phenomenon we know now. She was still learning how to be comfortable singing in English. Peabo, in his own way, helped guide her through that. Celine has said so herself, describing how wonderful and generous he was in the studio, how he made her comfortable in a moment where she could have felt intimidated. That is who Peabo Bryson was as a collaborator. He made everyone around him better. The song was a massive hit. It reached number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100, and at the 1993 Grammy Awards, it won Best Pop Performance by a duo or group with vocal. Both songs also won Oscars for Best Original Song, but those Oscars went to the songwriters, not to Peabo and Celine, something I personally think the Recording Academy needs to come to terms with, but that is a conversation for another video. Then Disney came back. In 1992, Peabo recorded A Whole New World with Regina Belle for Aladdin, and that song did something that had never been done before in the history of popular music. It became the first song from an animated film to reach #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. #1. For context, it took nearly 30 more years for another animated film song to do it again. We Don't Talk About Bruno from Encanto finally matched that achievement in 2022. Peabo Bryson and Regina Belle sat alone on that mountain for 29 years. The industry just let the world forget. Simultaneously, and I mean right at that same February 1993 moment, A Whole New World was sitting at #1 on the pop chart. The Beauty and the Beast recording was still dominating adult contemporary. Kenny G's Breathless album had Peabo's guest vocal contribution at the top of the contemporary jazz chart, and a studio cast recording of The King and I was topping the classical crossover chart. That is the historic 4-chart moment I mentioned at the top of this video. It actually happened, it is documented, and almost nobody is talking about it right now. But here is where the story gets complicated. And this is the part that most tribute videos are going to gloss over because it makes people uncomfortable. Peabo Bryson, despite all of this, had some very dark chapters. In August 2003, the Internal Revenue Service came to his home in Atlanta and seized his property. Not a couple of items. They took everything. The auction included his grand piano, a soundboard and mixer, African artwork, gold records, hundreds of pairs of shoes, a large antique bed, and this is the part that genuinely breaks your heart, both of his Grammy Awards. Both of them. the trophies he won for Beauty and the Beast and A Whole New World. The IRS put them on the auction block to satisfy a reported tax debt of $1.2 million dating back to 1984. And before anyone says anything, yes, that is a lot of money owed to the government. But we are also talking about a man who almost single-handedly carried Disney's music legacy in the early 90s. The same songs that are still in every Disney princess playlist, still streaming millions of times a year, still being played at weddings. Those songs were made by a man who had his Grammys auctioned off in 2003. And while we are here, think about the context of what was happening in R&B at that exact moment. Babyface was winning Grammys. Anita Baker was being celebrated as a genre icon. BET and Soul Train were holding their award shows and centering Black excellence in music. And Peabo Bryson, who had as much claim to that era's legacy as anyone, was watching his trophies go to the auction block. Now here's the small mercy in that story. A family friend stepped in and bought back the Grammy for A Whole New World at that auction and vowed to return it to Peabo. Whether the Beauty and the Beast Grammy was ever recovered is not confirmed in the public record, but the image of Peabo Bryson's Grammy being sold at a government auction while Disney was making billions off the songs those trophies represented, that is a story that deserves its own documentary, not a footnote, a full documentary. Then came April 27, 2019. Peabo was at his Marietta, Georgia home when he suffered a massive heart attack. He had no pulse, he was not breathing. The statistic from that moment, confirmed by Atlanta area fire officials, is that only 13% of people found in that condition actually survive. Peabo was part of that 13% because of his wife. Tanya Boniface Bryson called 911 and a dispatcher named Chris Hayes stayed on the phone with her and walked her through CPR step by step until first responders arrived. She did not fall apart. She did not freeze. She performed CPR on her husband until the ambulance came and she saved his life. After his recovery, Peabo and Tanya visited Cobb County Fire Station 3 in person to thank the first responders face to face. He told them, "You don't know that you're going to survive anything like this, but when you do, the life that you had before is not the life that you have now. There is so much to be grateful for." He actually said he believed there was a song in that experience somewhere. Even in that moment of almost losing everything, Peabo Bryson was thinking about music. And that recovery, that second chance, is what led directly to what would become his final act. The Golden Touch Tour. Announced in August 2025, the tour was a celebration of 50 years in music, spanning Peabo's entire career from 1976 to 2026. He was also in the studio recording new music with the legendary Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, the same production duo responsible for some of Janet Jackson's greatest work and one of the most celebrated creative partnerships in the history of R&B and soul music. There was also a memoir in the works, filled with stories spanning his 5 decades in the industry. He was touring, he was recording, he was celebrating. As recently as May 2nd of this year, Peabo Bryson was performing alongside Jeffrey Osborne at Treelith Live in Fayetteville, Georgia, delivering full shows and engaging with audiences. He had Golden Touch tour dates booked for June 13th and 14th in Charlotte, North Carolina. He had just turned 75 on April 13th and posted family photos from the occasion. Every signal was that Peabo Bryson had more chapters to write. Then on May 31, 2026, CBS News reported that he had suffered a stroke and been hospitalized. 3 days later, on June 2, 2026 at 5:00 p.m. Eastern Time, surrounded by his wife and the people who loved him most, Peabo Bryson passed away at a hospital in Marietta, Georgia. The family's statement read, "With broken hearts and profound sadness, the family of 2-time Grammy Award-winning singer, songwriter, and balladeer Peabo Bryson announces his passing. His music carried generations through joyful celebrations, great love stories, and enduring moments of comfort and inspiration. His legacy and music will live on for generations to come." He is survived by his wife Tanya, his son Robert, who has been seen singing alongside him in social media videos, his daughter Linda, and 3 grandchildren. Now let's talk about Kenny Lattimore. Because while the tributes poured in from across the industry, and there were many, Kenny Lattimore's response stood apart, and here is why that matters. Kenny Lattimore is not just a casual admirer of Peabo Bryson. Kenny Lattimore is, in many ways, the direct, spiritual descendant of what Peabo built. Both men occupy the same lane, that smooth, serious, vocally disciplined R&B balladeer space, the soul music tradition rooted in the quiet storm format that never chases trends, never sacrifices artistry for a radio moment, and never lets the music become purely commercial at the expense of the soul. If Peabo Bryson was the architect of that sound, Kenny Lattimore is one of the few people who actually studied the blueprint and built something worthy of it. Lattimore was born in Washington, D.C. on April 10, 1970. He grew up in a musical family, sang in church and school choirs, studied classical music, attended Howard University where he was originally pursuing architecture and still heard the music call louder than the drafting table. He met Chaka Khan when he was 8 years old. He was shaped by Stevie Wonder and Luther Vandross. You can hear all of that in his voice, that range of influence, that depth of preparation. He fronted an R&B group called Mannequin in the late 1980s before going solo. Signed to Columbia Records in 1995, his self-titled debut album dropped in 1996, and it produced 2 top 20 hits, Never Too Busy and the song that would define his brand forever, For You. That song peaked at number 6 on the R&B charts and spent 10 weeks at number 1 on the Urban Adult Contemporary charts. It earned a Grammy nomination for Best Male R&B Vocal Performance, and it became the wedding song of a generation. If you have been to a black wedding in the last 30 years, there is a very high probability that For You was involved. It is one of those songs that has become permanently embedded in the ceremonial fabric of American romantic life. And Kenny Lattimore wrote it in high school, literally in high school, with his classmate Kenny Leram. And here's where things get appropriately poetic. When Kenny Lattimore married Judge Faith Jenkins in Los Angeles on March 8, 2020, he chose not to walk her down the aisle to his own song. Instead, they had Stevie Wonder, the man who literally helped shape Kenny's musical identity, perform live at their wedding. Because when you are Kenny Lattimore and you are the man who has given every couple in America their first dance song, you get to have Stevie Wonder sing at your wedding. The universe balances that out. He has released 10 studio albums, including 2 acclaimed duet records with his then-wife Shantae Moore. Things That Lovers Do in 2003 became his highest-charting album of his career, debuting at number 3 on the R&B chart. Clive Davis personally signed him to Arista Records in 2001. The New York Times named him a modern soul man. He was inducted into the Rhythm and Blues Music Hall of Fame in 2024. He received the AmeriCorps Lifetime Achievement Award in 2025. He has performed at the BET Awards and received recognition on the Soul Train stage, both institutions that represent the highest honors black music has to offer. And he is still releasing music on his own independent label, Sincere Soul Records, with recent singles charting on Billboard. That is not a nostalgia act. That is an active, working, thriving artist who never stopped making music that mattered. So when Peabo Bryson passed on June 2nd, Kenny Lattimore was one of the first artists in the industry to speak. And what he said matters. On social media, Lattimore wrote, "Our brother Peabo Bryson has joined the ancestors, one of the greatest voices our genre has ever known. Thank you for the legendary music, the excellence, and your supreme example. Your legacy is forever etched into the heart of R&B and beyond." Now read that carefully. He did not say rest in peace and move on. He did not post a generic "I'm so saddened" and call it a day. He called Peabo our brother. He said he joined the ancestors. Language that carries specific cultural weight, that speaks to a legacy that transcends death, that positions Peabo Bryson not as someone who died, but as someone who graduated into a higher place. He called Peabo's career a supreme example, not just great music, not just hits, but an example, a standard, a template for how to do this work with integrity and longevity and purpose. And that right there is what makes Kenny Lattimore's tribute hit differently than almost anyone else's. Because Kenny was not just mourning a legend, he was mourning a mentor in spirit, someone whose example shaped how Kenny understood what it meant to be a male R&B vocalist who takes the work seriously. The tribute carried the weight of a student acknowledging a teacher, even if the two men had never spent significant formal time together. In R&B, those lineages are often invisible, passed through records, through watching, through being shaped by what you heard when you were young and hungry. Celine Dion, who called herself heartbroken, spoke beautifully about their studio connection and how Peabo made her comfortable when she was learning to sing in English. Jody Watley, who toured with him on the Colors of Christmas series, described him as the definition of class, intelligence, and authenticity. Anita Baker, another titan of that same 80s and 90s R&B ballad era, another artist who understood what it meant to build a career on vocal discipline and artistic integrity rather than trends, also paid tribute, recognizing a peer and a kindred spirit. And Andre Dickens, the mayor of Atlanta, Peabo's home city for decades, also paid his respects. But Kenny Lattimore's words landed in a specific way for R&B fans who understand the lineage, because those fans know that what Peabo built is something that does not get rebuilt very often. The ability to sustain a career across 6 decades, across multiple labels, across changing tastes and evolving radio formats, while never compromising the vocal craft, that is extraordinarily rare. And Kenny Lattimore is one of the handful of artists alive today who genuinely understood what made Peabo Bryson's career remarkable beyond just the hits. Now here's my honest hot take, and I'm going to say it plainly. The music industry failed Peabo Bryson while he was alive. Not in a dramatic, scandal-driven way, in the quiet, exhausting way that the industry always fails artists who are not flashy enough, controversial enough, or young enough to generate constant clicks. The man had his Grammys auctioned off by the IRS in 2003, and the industry did not rally around him. He survived a heart attack in 2019, where only 13% of people in his condition make it, and the industry gave him a brief wave of attention before moving on. He was out here on a 50-city tour in his mid-70s, performing shows, recording new music, writing a memoir, doing the work, and most of these same platforms and outlets that are now writing beautiful tributes were not giving him front-page coverage last year. This is the R&B conversation that nobody wants to have. The genre has a long history of celebrating its legends only in obituaries. Peabo Bryson deserved sold-out arena retrospectives and major label re-release campaigns and Grammy Lifetime Achievement tributes while he was alive to receive them, not a week after he passed. That is not a critique of any individual outlet. That is a structural failure of how the industry treats its older Black artists, full stop. And it is not unique to Peabo. It is the same pattern we have seen play out with soul music legends across Motown, across Atlantic Records, across every great label that built its empire on the backs of Black vocalists and then moved on when the next trend arrived. And Kenny Lattimore's tribute lands harder in that context because Kenny is himself a part of that same ecosystem. He knows exactly how this industry works. He has navigated it for 30 years on independent terms, fought for his creative control, built his own label. When Kenny Lattimore calls Peabo Bryson's career a supreme example, he is speaking as someone who understood the discipline and the sacrifice that example required. The question that fans across social media have been asking this past week is whether there will be a formal public memorial, and whether artists like Kenny Lattimore, Celine Dion, or Regina Belle might perform. As of today, June 9, 2026, the family has stated that celebration of life arrangements will be announced at a later date. The family requested privacy in their initial statement, and that privacy deserves to be honored. There has been no confirmed date, location, or performer lineup for any public service. But what I will say is this: if there is a celebration of life for Peabo Bryson, and it is done right, it should not just be a collection of people singing his songs, it should be the industry taking the opportunity to finally publicly reckon with what it allowed to be under-celebrated for too long. It should include the stories, the Chitlin Circuit stories, the 4 charts simultaneously story, the Grammy auction story, the CPR story, the music he was still making in his final chapter, Peabo Bryson's life contains multitudes, and those multitudes deserve to be spoken aloud. And if Kenny Lattimore gets a microphone at that service, I have a feeling his words are going to land the same way his tribute post did. Heavy, specific, real. Before we wrap this up, let me bring it back to both of these men and what they represent together, because I think there is something meaningful in the pairing that is worth naming. Peabo Bryson built the house. He laid the foundation for what serious, artistically disciplined, romantically grounded black male balladry could look like in the modern era. He did it without apology, without gimmick, without chasing trends. He owned the quiet storm. He was on the Chitlin circuit at 14, and he was still performing at 74, still recording, still believing in the music. Kenny Lattimore inherited that blueprint and built something worthy of it. He has been described as a modern soul man. He earned a Grammy nomination with his first major hit. He made the song that every black couple has played at their wedding for 30 years. He navigated a major label divorce, started his own label, stayed in the game, and is still charting on Billboard in 2025. And when Peabo Bryson passed, he did not reach for a publicist-approved generic statement. He reached for something true. Our brother Peabo Bryson has joined the ancestors. That is not a press release. That is a man who understood what he was saying. The conversation about who carries R&B and soul music forward from this generation is ongoing, and there are legitimate debates about whether the genre as Peabo and Kenny defined it, serious, vocally demanding, emotionally mature, built for the quiet storm and the wedding reception and the long drive home, has the commercial platform it once did. But what is not debatable is that the lineage exists, it is real, it was passed forward, and Kenny Lattimore's tribute to Peabo Bryson is, in its own quiet way, an act of carrying that torch. There is music still waiting to be heard. There is a family grieving in Marietta, Georgia. There is a genre that just lost its Pavarotti, and there is Kenny Lattimore, standing in the gap between what was and what still can be, saying, "Our brother joined the ancestors, and thank you for the supreme example." That is the story. That is where we are today. If you are a longtime Peabo Bryson fan, drop a comment below and tell me your favorite song of his. Not Beauty and the Beast, not A Whole New World, something deeper, Feel the Fire, If Ever You're in My Arms Again, Can You Stop the Rain, Tonight I Celebrate My Love. Let's have that conversation in the comments. And if you have never heard Kenny Lattimore's For You, go find it right now. Play it once, then tell me you do not understand why this man belongs in the Hall of Fame. Rest in power, Peabo Bryson. The ancestors received a king,